Hi, this is Rob Polinick from C3Method. I want to take you through my push workout today. We're going to cover chest, shoulders, and triceps. I want to show you the exercises that I'm choosing and share some technique tips for each exercise. I'm in an odd position, but I want to show you the setup I have for the first exercise. This is going to be chest supported flies, cable flies. So I have a Sorinex Bulldog pad right here, and I have some pins put in place. I got this cross member brace right here that you can see that centers in between the squat rack. So the squat rack we have here is Sorinex's Apex rack. So there's a cable station on both sides, and then you have like the pull-up handles and everything across the middle you can see. So what I have set up here now is this center post, and then we use the Sorinex Bulldog pad to give me a back support. And then I have just a couple utility pins in place right there from Rogue to help hold everything. But that's going to give me good back support. So when I'm doing that exercise, I now can wedge myself back into this pad. And the way I have it, where you'll see in the video, is I lean back into it, my feet are out in front, so my weight is pushed back into the pad. I'm then going to do the flies, but I want to purposely rotate my elbows up. I don't want to lift my shoulders, but within my shoulders being the proper position, instead of my elbows pointing down, I want to rotate them up. I'm then going to let my shoulders by the cables be pulled back over the pad, and this is going to really stretch open my chest. And then when I squeeze forward, I'm thinking of bringing my shoulders forward. I don't want to bring my back off the pad, but I am letting my shoulders be stretched back over the pad and then squeeze forward. So stretch back over the pad and squeeze forward. Having a setup like this is a great way to really pull that stretch, and that, for me specifically, it feels like it really targets the upper portion of the chest and builds that shelf in the chest, and it gets a nice full look. The other benefit is, since we have this set in between the cable stations, let me elevate this a little bit so you can see my face, is since we have it set in between the cable stations, when I grab the handles, the stretched position here, once I accept the weight load, and you'll see the weight stack lift, in this position there is weight, but it is easier because my arms are closer to being parallel with the cables than the inside position where my arms are perpendicular to the cables. So this is actually a harder position for the same weight load than this is. What this does is this allows me to target the inner portion of my chest. So by using the back support and then letting the weight stretch me over, I'm now stretching and stimulating the upper portion of the chest very specifically. Then as I drive inward, I'm targeting the inner portion. So the upper and inner portion of the chest are often the slowest to develop, and they would be considered like the weak point of the muscle bellies. So most people need more upper and inner chest. This exercise specifically targets both of those areas, and I use it at the very beginning of my workout. So when I'm most fresh, I can target the areas that need it the most. So therefore I can maximize stimulus, I can maximize weight load, I can even do some extra working sets. And then when I move into dumbbell presses and Smith machine presses, which are my next two chest movements, I can then better target the more dominant fibers. But now that the preliminary stress, the initial stress, was in the weakest areas, when I then bring in the dominant fibers, they can actually help drive the weakest areas further and further and further into fatigue. I really like this because it's allowed me over time to fill in the inner and upper portion of my chest significantly. I've broken my collarbone 3 times due to things outside of the gym. I have metal plates put in there, and it really underdeveloped the right side specifically. And just due to long background in powerlifting, where you do a lot of flat benching, I kind of built more of the outside and bottom portion of the chest. So now that I'm getting into more aesthetic work and wanting to eventually do a bodybuilding show, by changing my workout around and having this type of exercise first, it's really balanced out that development of the powerlifting, and it's balanced out the imbalance that I was having from that chest and shoulder injury with a collarbone. Okay, a lot of yapping, a lot of talking, but I'll show you some working sets. But this would be a great exercise if you have a chance to set this up. You can just put a bench, like a normal adjustable bench, like I have one right here. So I could roll this out and set it up and be upright and have that in the position. But I really like the standing version because I can manipulate more of my hip positioning. And I also like this middle support for some other exercises that I wanted on the Sornex rack as well. But I thought this would be fun to share. It's really nuancy, but it's fun to see what some of the benefits of being nuancy is about. How you can target specific areas and really build those areas up to balance not only your individual needs, for me would be balancing the powerlifting and the injuries, but also just balance the aesthetic needs that most people are going to face, which is needing to build the inner and upper portion of the chest. Here's one of my working sets, and what I really want to show is the elbow rotation, the elbows being up but not the shoulders being up, and that as the cables are going out, I'm letting my shoulders be pulled back over the shoulder pad. Okay, so let's see. Ooh, okay. And then the other thing you'll notice is from that stretch position, I don't want to let my hands come out and then like bounce into the next rep where you release tension on that last little bit to get a little spring. I try to really focus on that good stretch and then contracting through my chest, my outer chest. Really think of squeezing the outer chest to start each repetition. The next exercise I go into is a dumbbell incline press. Sometimes I'll do it flat, but I usually do an incline, and that's again to target the upper portion of the chest. On this bench, this is a Rep Fitness Blackwing bench. The increments of incline are 10%, 20%, 30%, and then it kind of goes up from there. But those are the three options I will rotate through based on how I feel that day. If I want to go heavier in my dumbbell work, I'll usually stay around the 10 or 20. If I want to go a little bit lighter and maybe a little bit of a wider press just to focus on lower stress on the joints, maybe I'm feeling a little fatigued, maybe I haven't recovered as well, I'll go up to that 30-degree incline. When I do the presses, in general, my focus is to get constant chest tension. And the difference in that is I'm not just trying to move the weight, so I don't want to do a straight up and down press. I'll actually press with it being a little wider at the bottom, and then I squeeze my chest, and I'll actually bring the dumbbells a little bit in towards the top. However, they're always going to stay slightly outside of my shoulder joint. If I let the dumbbell above my shoulder joint, it compresses through the joints rather than staying loaded into the muscle. So I want to keep my hand, or the center of the dumbbell, basically the handle, a little bit outside of the shoulder joint so it's always pulling my arm open, and that's going to keep my chest engaged. So at the top, I'm just slightly outside of my shoulders, but then as I lower down, I aim to widen that. Now, I don't want to go so wide that my forearm is angled outward. My forearm is going to stay perpendicular to the floor. That's going to make sure that I don't make the movement weaker than it should be and have to turn it into a fly more than a press, and it reduces the risk of tearing your pec. So I want to get a little bit of an arc, a little bit of a wide at the bottom, a little bit of an in at the top. And then the other adjustment I'll make is my hand angle. I find for myself that I get more chest engagement if my hands are slightly angled, meaning they're not a 45-degree angle, but they're not totally flat. They're somewhere in the middle. You can say 60 degrees, it doesn't really matter, just somewhere in the middle. And then I'm focusing on just trying to feel my chest stretch, and then I flex through my chest. So stretch and flex. Some days it will be to where kind of the inside head of the dumbbell like touches my shoulder. Other days, sometimes that'll feel a little uncomfortable in my shoulder joint, and I'll stop a little bit short of that, keep the tension in my chest and flex out of the bottom. So the range of motion does vary a little bit. It depends on kind of what I did on my pull day, what kind of back movements I did. Did I do pull-ups, which might help open up my chest a little bit more? Did I not do that? Did I do certain movements on leg day? If I did, like, say, a barbell squat or a Smith machine squat, I would have pulled my chest open, getting into external rotations. Maybe it's a little more open for the press day. There's a lot of little small variations. Also, time of the day of the workout, hydration levels, all this fun stuff. So my goal is just when I'm doing the movement, do I feel my chest constantly engaged? If I go a little too low and I lose that engagement and it drops into my front shoulder, I don't want to do that. If I go so low that it starts to make my chest feel twingy or feel uncomfortable, I don't want to do that. So I'm not strict to a range of motion, I'm strict to feeling it in my chest. Now, I'll go ahead and get into this. So this is going to be first of one of my working sets, probably. I think I'm just going to do some high rep presses today, and for me that's usually something over 12. So we'll see how I do with these, and then we'll adjust our sets from there. Okay, so I think I got 14. On the 14th one, I did feel like a good squeeze and flex. I might have been able to try 15th, but I didn't want to lose the chest focus. And this is the first of my working sets. I normally will do 3 to 4 working sets. So if I want to push the intensity of something, I'll usually wait till the 3rd or 4th set. On the first 1 or 2, I focus more on really good technique, so that way I can get the volume of the first 1 and 2 in before maybe I try an extra rep and just annoy something for that day and need to stop the movement. I don't want to do that on the first set and then miss all the volume. So usually if I'm going to push a progression, I tend to push into risking perfect technique on the latter sets, not the first sets. Okay, so there's some tips and tricks for dumbbell incline press. The next exercise is a Smith machine incline press. Again, with this, I'll play around with different degrees of incline, 10, 20, 30. Depending on how I want to do it that day, whether I want to go heavy, whether I want to double up on the angle I use in the dumbbells or use a complementary angle. I allow myself a little bit of play based on how I feel that day. Then the main focus for this, for Smith machine work, the technique components I look for is at the top, I want to press to squeeze my chest, but I want to leave my arms slightly bent. I don't want to overextend my arms to where it starts to transfer out of my chest and into my triceps. If you have short upper arm bones, you'll notice that that happens sooner in the range of motion than somebody with longer upper arm bones. If they have long upper arm bones, they can get almost to a full lockout before their triceps would take over. If you have short upper arm bones, you'll notice that basically as soon as you get over halfway, your triceps start to take over. So the range of motion, if you're purely chest focused, for a short upper arm bone lifter is going to look really short. It's almost going to look like you're doing like pump reps or half reps. But if that allows you to stay in your chest the whole time, that's totally fine and that's ideal if you're going for chest growth. If you're looking for pressing strength and you want to use the full range of motion and use all the muscles you can, but you're probably not using a Smith machine for pressing strength. The other component I'll look for in this is I want to think of at the bottom of pushing myself away from the bar, not pushing the bar up. So you'll feel this in a sense, you'll be able to feel it if you practice it, in the pressure of your shoulders. You'll notice that if you're pushing the bar away, your shoulders actually push back into the bench harder. So from the bottom, you'll push yourself back into the bench. This keeps more of a chest focus. If as I push up, I think of pushing the bar up, my front shoulders will become more engaged. I'll get less chest development. So when we get to the bottom, we have our rib cage up, everything's pressed up into the bar, and then I want to think of pushing away from the bar at the bottom. So short range of motion, keeping the chest focus, and then push away from the bar. I'll go ahead and get a set in so you can see what it looks like. Okay, there you go. So that was a pretty good set. And the same thing we think of with the dumbbells is we want to flex our chest from the bottom. I'm not trying to bounce out of the bottom. I'm not trying to use a fast range of motion. If you notice, I have a nice and slow eccentric, so I can feel the chest stretching and loading, and then I flex through the chest, and then nice slow eccentric. The more you focus on the chest, the more growth you'll get from the chest. So all these technique tips are intended to just make sure that you're isolating your chest as much as you can. I finished up the chest portion of the workout. I ended up doing 10 total working sets. I do train my chest twice a week, so I'll be getting another 10 here in a couple days. That's plenty of volume for me. I find that I get good growth, but it balances any kind of connective tissue stress, overall body stress. So the main chest movements were the back supported cable flies, incline dumbbell press, incline Smith machine press. I now move into lateral raises to work on the mid delt, and I'll start that, like the first of the two movements for the shoulders is cable lateral raise. I set the cable at about my hip height, maybe a little bit lower, say mid thigh, and then I use a wrist cuff. This is just a cheap wrist cuff I buy off Amazon, and I'll put it in a I'll bind it together, put it in a circle about the size of my fist. So then I can slide my hand in, slide my hand out. And what I like about this is with this setup, I can slide my hand in and now I'm ready to go. I can push when I do the movement. I'll be pushing through my wrist. And that allows me to release some of the tension and stress you feel in the forearm related to gripping something. This allows for that to kind of fade away, be very low, and then I can get better mind-muscle connection in the mid-delt. So I'm just going to be pushing through the back side of my wrist, thinking of pushing the cable out away from myself. I want to think of out and away, in order to keep my shoulder joint down. If I think of lifting up, I would tend to shrug and over-involve my trap, which is going to take away from the mid-delt. So I want to think of pushing away. And you'll notice that that leaves the end range position where my mid-delt is flexed. Like right here, that's a shortened muscle. Perfect. But my hand isn't very high. My elbow isn't even as high as my shoulder. This allows for a complete flexion, shortening of the mid-delt, but with minimal trap involvement. And then the benefit of having the cable set up at this height rather than all the way at the bottom is when I accept the weight load into the muscle. So I step out and now the weight is on my arm. This is the most stretched position for the mid-delt. It's also going to be extremely heavy. So it's very heavy in the stretch position at the bottom. And then as I raise up, it is still challenging, but it's a little less challenging. I don't know about the percentages. Maybe a 10, 20% reduction doesn't feel like much. So maybe a 10% reduction. But this feels heavy and challenging the whole way through the range of motion, with the biggest emphasis in the most stretched position. Whereas when you do dumbbells, the bottom position is usually the lightest and you're going to feel very minimal tension. As you raise up and as the muscle shortens, it's going to get a lot harder. The benefit of loading the muscle heavier in a stretched position is it causes more stress and damage to the tissue when you start the contraction. If you start a contraction lighter, and then as the muscle shortens, it gets heavier, like you feel in dumbbells, that's actually nicer to the muscle. It doesn't cause as much stress to the muscle. Therefore, you might need more weight and more volume to get the same amount of growth out of a dumbbell resistance than you would out of this cable. Since this, in the most exposed position at the start of the contraction, is very stressful, you don't need as much weight, you don't need as much volume. So this is safer on the joints, but still produces really good, if not better, muscle development. So I showed you a few reps, but now we'll actually do a working set. For this, I like to stay usually higher reps, 10 to 20, but almost always like 14 to 20. Because I find that when I go at a weight light enough to do 14 to 20, it's light enough that I can focus on that mind-muscle connection and not get my trap involved. If I go heavier than that, my trap tends to start to get involved when the muscle fatigues because the stress and the weight load is greater than what the mid-delt can really handle. I might do that every now and then just as a little bit of an overload progression, but more often than not, I will stay with the 14 to 20 rep range. Okay, so let's get a working set in. There we go. So again, what my focus is just really focusing only on that mid-delt. I want to have tension at the top, tension at the bottom. At no point am I letting anything release in the tension. So at the bottom, you might be tempted to kind of let your upper arm press into your body and release some of that tension, but you want to try to avoid doing that. This is going to feel like you're using the middle 80% of the range of motion. Maybe you're missing a little bit, like 10% at the bottom, 10% at the top, but there's that constant tension. I have no clue how many reps this is, but this is painful, so it's working really well. Oh, let's try one more. Okay, that was a partial rep at the end, but that was very good. So that's the focus, and now I'll flip around to the other arm, but these are some tips and tricks for cable lateral raises. The second exercise I do for shoulders is lateral raises. I did just talk a little bit of crap on them in the previous section of the video. However, I do like them as a complement to the cable lateral raises. Even though the strength curve is different and with dumbbells, it isn't as efficient for muscle damage, you still just can't go wrong sometimes with the basics. People have built beautiful mid-delts, big shoulders, doing lateral raises. So, you know, if it works, it works. I think the cable lateral raises are a nice complement, but you can't just do cable lateral raises to grow the entire muscle, just like you wouldn't just do one exercise to grow your whole chest. If you want to get a little bit of variety, a little bit of change in the stimulus to what you're presenting to the muscle, dumbbell lateral raises are a great choice for shoulder development. With these, it's similar in the concept that I'm thinking of raising the dumbbells out to the side, not up. That way it doesn't over-involve the traps. I just want to focus on the mid delt. This again will look like a shortened range of motion than what most people are used to. And then for this, actually before I show you, we want to think of our elbows being higher than our hands. So at the top, I want to lead with my elbow out to the side. So it's almost like something's right here, like somebody's holding my arms down, and I'm trying to push their hands out. So I'm pushing their hands out from my elbows. If you have a training partner at all, that actually might be a neat thing for you to try, is you can just stand with some lighter dumbbells just so that we can practice it. Have them put their hands right above your elbow joint and kind of push in a little bit. You can push out against that pressure, and then they'll just remove their hands, and you can think of mimicking that pressure where you're pushing out against the elbow joint. This is going to help you better isolate the mid delt rather than involving the trap. You're going to get much better growth. You might not be able to lift as much weight, but it doesn't matter. We don't care what weight we're lifting. We care more about what muscle is lifting the weight. So we want to use these technique tips to help better isolate the areas that we're actually trying to grow. So with that in mind, that's what I'm going to be thinking of when I do this set. Okay. I have a mirror in front of me. That's what I'm looking at, by the way. I like to use the mirror as a way to just kind of double check with what I'm feeling so I can actually see that as well. With the surgeries I've had on my shoulder, having the metal plates put in, it helps me make sure that as I've recovered from that surgery and the other surgeries, that everything's been equal in what I feel versus what I see. Okay, so there's 20 reps. I normally would move up, but these dumbbells are right in the video, so it was easier. But that's the technique I want to keep, and I usually do 14 to 20 reps. Again, focusing on the quality of everything, not the weight load. If I do want to challenge the muscles and get a progression in weight load, I'll do a couple clean sets and then maybe one or two sets where I'll push a little bit of extra weight, use a little bit of momentum. I'll cheat the technique a bit, but I don't do that on all the sets. I'll just do that in the last one or two, and I might do that once maybe every other month, something like that. Just if I feel like the movement's getting a little stagnant, I'll throw that in as a little bit of a change of pace. So hopefully those tips, especially that kind of thought of like pushing out through the elbows, give that a try, and I hope that helps. The last movement for this workout is going to be a tricep isolation. Since I have short upper arm bones, my triceps get involved in my chest presses. Even if I try to really isolate my chest, the triceps are still secondarily involved. So I find that I don't need as much tricep isolation work in order to get them to grow. So I usually just end the workout with one tricep isolation movement. If you want some extra stress on your triceps, you can definitely throw another one in. I tend to superset this tricep with the lateral raises, so I'm actually going back and forth. If you were going to add a second tricep movement, I would have supersetted that with the cable lateral raises, so that way it just saves you a little bit of time. If you're doing the one arm lateral raise, you can definitely do some tricep work in between that, and it won't take away from the performance on the lateral raises and vice versa. So now for this one, what I finish with is the presses are kind of like my arm is down and beside my body. So the tricep stimulus I'm getting in dumbbell presses and Smith machine presses is with my arm kind of beside my body. That would be the same as tricep press downs, or even you could say like a little bit of like a skull crusher, but definitely tricep press downs. That would be a little redundant to the tricep work that I'm getting in presses. So I like to finish my tricep work, have my isolation be an overhead type of movement, or maybe I'll do a JM press or a skull crusher, something like that. But I like to do overhead when I can, because that gives the tricep a whole new position, a really good stretch on the long head of the tricep, which gives that good meat to the arm. So when you like pose, like do a big pose like this, it gives you a nice sweep underneath here. So I like to do the overhead work, since that's different than the tricep work I'm getting in presses. What I find for myself is tricep presses tend to grow really well for the outside portion here, and you'll get some definite long head development, but I like to emphasize the long head when I do my isolation work, since it adds the most bang for your buck in tricep development. Triceps, 3 muscles, the long head is going to add the most meat to the arm. With this one, what I do is a cable overhead extension. I set the cable around this height, like chest height, just so I'm not picking it up off the floor. It's going to be still an overhead position, but it's just easier to get in and out of. I have my individual rope grips. These are actually just single rope grips, and I use those for like one arm movements and other type of rotational work for core. So I bought 2 just so I can put them together and do a traditional rope work. With this, I'll go ahead and get it into position and step away from the cable stack, so now it's loaded. I let that weight kind of pull and stretch my lats and triceps. So once I feel like I'm in a good stretch position, but I'm not overextended in my abs, so I don't want to be in a position where my core is stretched open. I want to have neutrality in my spine, so I'm still standing like I normally would. My abs are tight. I'm just going to be leaning forward, but I don't want to let everything pull on me so much that I'm opening up like this. I want to keep the abs tight to keep the neutral spine position, and that ensures that the stretch I get in that position up top comes from my triceps, not compensating through my abs or my lats. I really want it to be as much of a tricep stretch as possible. So this preloads the triceps. Now from here, I'm going to go ahead and press up and out, and just thinking of pushing my pinkies through the ends of the rope grip. Now for myself, I find that I get really good tricep stimulus if I let my elbows flare. So I actually kind of point my elbows out to the side, and I let that be my comfortable position and line of push. So I'm not thinking of trying to bring my elbows down and kind of crunching them next to my body and extending out like that. That feels awful. Probably messed up the microphone as well. But I want to let my elbows feel like they're in a comfortable position to where I can recruit as much of a balance through all of the triceps, the 3 muscles, as I can. It's still going to be long head dominant, but I want to feel like it's a nice even recruitment through the full tricep muscle. I get a good stretch and contraction through the full range of motion. Now for this one, I do like to do a little bit of higher reps. I'll usually do sets of 14 to 20. So that way I'm slow, controlled, making sure I'm really isolating the triceps, not getting body momentum, not bouncing out of the bottom. If I think about doing any heavy tricep work, that was done with the dumbbell presses in the Smith machine press. I don't need heaviness in the tricep isolation. It's more important for me to actually isolate the tricep and make sure that as much of the stress goes into the tricep, not compensating muscles. So that's what I'll finish this workout with. So we did 3 chest movements. We did a fly, a press, and a press. And then we did a cable lateral raise, dumbbell lateral raise, and we end with tricep isolation. If you have any questions, if you have any requests for future videos, anything you need at all, just put it in the comments section below. I appreciate you watching, and that's it. Hopefully this was helpful.